Ho, 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 cheeky monkeys.
Toppy.
It's Bergkamp. That's magnificent.
Well done. Bye-bye.
Be like the Arsenal. Be ambitious. Come on.
Hello, cheeky monkeys, and welcome to a Bergkamp Wonderland podcast special. You called for it, and we delivered. I am your host, Kris, of course, the Dirty Pirate, and it's a bit of a takeover special. This one, as you may have guessed from our tweet earlier on, this is kind of a French Football Weekly ABW crossover, because you might have noticed we've got a French team in the Europa League. So I thought, who better to drag onto the old microphones and have a little chat with me and two of my best buddies from France, or indeed French supporting buddies. So I've got, firstly, Mr. Jeremy Smith. Good evening, Jez.
Hello.
And we also have Rennes fan, Mr. Rich Allen. Hello, Rich.
Hello there.
Right, so we're going to launch straight into it. Rich, obviously I'm going to have to start with you because I'm sure lots of our listeners will be like thinking, hang on a minute, he sounds very English. How did you come to support Rennes?
In arguably the most middle-class way possible, I think. It stemmed from family holidays, really, to the Brittany area, which Rennes is in. That started in about 98, coincide obviously with the World Cup. Year on year, we used to go on holiday there. As a kid and as a football fanatic, I'd start to pick up the fact that there was this local team, Stade Rennes, slowly start to check out their scores. You know, if I was in France, I'd look at go in the supermarket, read the paper. However, this is all before mobile phones. This is all before the age of the internet. So it was going into a news agent's, looking at the paper, just checking the scores. And that gradually built and built and built to the point it became, actually, you know what, I was following Rennes from here. I was able to access watching games, get up-to-date news. And all of a sudden, I found myself telling people when they asked me, what football team do you support? Oh, I support Rennes. And all of a sudden, it just happened. And probably then, since about 2012, since then, I would consider them as my premier team to support. I don't think there are many in this country. I really don't. And it's not the funnest of teams to support at times, but it's enjoyable for a variety of reasons. Let's say that. And yeah, then we've sort of arrived then at this point where finally it becomes relevant that I am a Rennes fan.
Yeah. Well, all of a sudden you have hundreds of people contacting you left, right, and centre, going, "Let me talk to you about Rennes." Me being one, of course. Jez, you're also much like myself and Rich, a follower of a French side. Metz for you though, so you're down in Ligue 2 with my little Lorient, bless us. What did you think when this draw was made? Was your sort of thoughts that's a good tie for Rennes and for French football, or was it, oh Christ, it could have been a bit easier? Because for those who don't know, Rennes got through a tough-looking two-legged tie against Betis in the previous round.
I think it definitely could have been easier. That on paper, they're more straightforward teams to play than Arsenal. I think all us as sort of French football followers were hoping that this tie would come up at one point or another, but obviously the idea would have been, well, the perfect idea would have been in the final, certainly a little bit later in the competition. But yeah, we're excited that the draw's happening, and I certainly don't think it's going to be a straightforward one for Arsenal. While they would definitely start as favourites, they would underestimate Rennes at their peril.
Yeah, true that. And I think that was the first thing I noticed. As soon as the draw came out, so many people went, "Oh, well, that's easy." And I just sat there and rolled my eyes, as I tend to do most weeks. Just sticking with you for a minute, Jez, as well. In terms of this game being played, we've finally had it confirmed the away leg's going to be played first. Some people may or may not be aware that Rennes' game was postponed at the weekend in Liga. So they've had a good sort of build-up. Where do you sit on that decision? Are you sort of comfortable with the idea that they could essentially do away with their tie against Nîmes to prepare for this game?
To be honest, no, I'm not at all. I mean, it depends what happens going forward, but I think it's a very dangerous precedent to set. I think there's always talk of how teams that are doing well in Europe should be given decent time off to prepare for it or to recover from European ties afterwards. The usual, obviously, for Europa League ties is that the club will play on the Sunday rather than the Saturday, for example. And I kind of like the idea of the LFP for once. Yeah, in France, the last few years, there's always been this recurring thing of teams fighting to get into the Europa League and then basically throwing it so that they can concentrate on the league in order to qualify for the Europa League again, which all seems a little bit weird. With the last couple of years, obviously Marseille getting to the final last year, Rennes doing well this year, I like that the clubs are taking it more seriously, and I like that the LFP in theory are sort of going out of their way to help the clubs. But this wasn't actually done in the first place at the LFP's initiative. It was Rennes asking for the match to be postponed because they're feeling a bit tired, which I think is a little bit lousy. You know, Marseille missed out on Champions League by 1 or 2 points last year, getting to the Europa League final. They weren't given these kind of indulgences, and yeah, it remains to be seen whether the LFP are going to do that for everyone every time. But there was someone after it was announced that the match was being postponed, someone tweeted, well, you know, if Rennes get to the final, does that mean that they're going to be finishing their domestic season in the middle of July or something? So I'm not comfortable with it. I think there were better ways of doing it. They could have, for example, just moved Rennes' match forward from Saturday to the Friday evening, for example. Logistically, it's not ideal, but with all the Gilets jaunes protests and lots of postponed matches in France recently, it's not out of the ordinary for them to do something like that. Yeah, not sure it was the right decision, unless that's going to be a standard policy for every team playing in Europe now.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's this kind of setting the precedent thing. If they do it for one, sort of have to do it for all. So it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forwards. But Rich, let's get an overview for you then. Overall, a lot of people, particularly obviously Arsenal fans, will be looking at this tie and they might know of Rennes and they might know of some of the players possibly. But what kind of season have you had? Because there's been a managerial change in the midst of it. Been a lesser known Hatem Ben Arfa pop up, and there's some very promising young players to maybe make note of as well. So give us your sort of thoughts on the overall season and indeed that sort of change at the helm and how it's taken effect.
Well, Sabri Lamouchi, the former coach, he took the team to 5th place last season in Liga, which got them the Europa League qualification. He took them through the majority of the Europa League group games, bar I want to say it's the final group game where they needed to win to qualify. He took them through that, but results in the league were pretty disappointing. There were plenty of fans who thought, well, considering the work he did last season to take them to 5th and rescue them from a poor start under the coach before, Christian Gourcuff, then maybe he could have been given longer. You know, he wasn't, and we found ourselves in the position where Julien Stéphan, who was the Rennes reserve team coach and actually came very close to joining Thierry Henry as part of the backroom staff when Henry joined Monaco, but Rennes managed to keep hold of him. He was promoted to first team coach, initially on a temporary basis, but very, very soon after that was converted to a permanent contract. Julien Stéphan's a young guy. He's the son of Guy Stéphane, the French national team assistant coach. He's a real sort of, it's a horrible cliche, but he's a real student of the game. He's taken a lot of time to research tactics. He's observed so many games. He watches coaches. How do they do things? Can he implement them? Can he do them any different? He is a real stats, numbers, tactics guy. And that has been, I think, reflected in the way Rennes have played. Certainly there has been a noticeable progression, I think, in the team since he took over. He's got them playing, I think, better football. I think key to that has been they're much more organised. From front to back, players know where they're playing, know the formation, the system they're playing. Relatively settled 11s. There was a lot of chopping and changing under Lamouchi. And they have progressed. Certainly his form in the league, I think he's only lost 3 in 12 since he took over. One of those was against PSG, so you can probably discount that. He's taken them to the semi-finals of the domestic French Cup, the Coupe de France. He's got them past Betis, you know, not an easy team to play against. They're obviously doing very well in La Liga and had some standout results there. He's managing to get from Rennes. I don't think the balance is quite there in terms of fully organised in terms of defence compared with the way that they can attack. It seems to still be a little bit one or the other at times. Makes for very entertaining football, but there's definitely progress to be seen since he's taken over. Now, in terms of players to look out for, I mean, the two that will jump out probably more to Arsenal fans will be, as you say, Hatem Ben Arfa and Ismaila Sarr. So Hassan Ben Arfa, obviously, he's well known in England from his time with Newcastle and briefly with Hull. And that was probably a great insight into him as a player. We saw flashes of brilliance. Some of the goals he scored for Newcastle were sensational, but we also saw him disappear. We also saw him at a sort of petulant state. He got his move to Nice, performed really well with Nice, got a move to PSG, barely got a look in at PSG, and then in the summer moved to Rennes. Overall, I think it's been a positive move. We are seeing some of his best football. There haven't been quite as many acts of sheer petulance as we perhaps thought there could have been. There has been one notably recently where he telephoned in to say he was too tired to attend a training session and therefore wasn't picked for the matchday squad, the recent game against Marseille. When he's on the ball, he can produce magic. That game away at Betis, he was really, really good. He actually showed a mature, responsible side to his game that I don't think many have seen recently. There wasn't too many of the flicks. He was recognising in himself that he's a senior. He's quite a senior player now. He's experienced, and that came through. So hopefully we can start to see more of that. And then Ismaila Sarr is a player that Arsenal have been heavily linked with probably over the last 6 to 12 months. One word with him is pace. Loves to have the ball at his feet, running at players. I still think there's an issue with his end product. It can be spectacular. We've seen 2 goals in the Europa League itself. One in the opening game against Jablonec, which I think probably quite a few people have seen. That sort of half volley from just outside the area, first time, absolutely amazing hit. He sort of similar goal against Astana in the final group game. But I still think, his final product, final decision-making is not quite where it needs to be. And yes, he is a player that naturally, through his style of play, attracts a lot of attention, shall we say, and he knows how to get the best of it. You could call it diving. I will defend my player, but it is. Let's be honest.
It wasn't diving when he was at Metz. It is now.
And it would be fair to say as well that having just played a certain team at Wembley who seem to be quite adept at that particular skill, we're used to it, so it'll be fine. So I think those 2 will be the standout players. Other players to keep an eye out for. Clément Grenier wants a big hope at Lyon. Unfortunately, injuries really cut his progression down, but he's back, he's fit, he's playing pretty well this season. Chances are he'll start in centre midfield alongside Benjamin Andre, club captain, really underrated midfielder, can control the game, loves a tackle, loves to pick up a yellow card every now and again. But two really strong centre midfielders. And then in defence, I think Stefan has brought the best out of the partnership of Edson Mexer and Damien De Silva. Centre-back pairing kept chopping and changing quite a bit. We lost Joris Gnagnon in the summer, who moved to Sevilla, top quality defender. It took a while for the first choice partnership to come to fruition. It seems that it's De Silva and Mexer. They seem to play together a lot now, and they are looking a strong partnership. And even Rami Bensebaini, who has been linked with a move to England last summer. He's not a left back. I hammer this home. He's not a left back. He's having to play left back because we don't really have many other options. But even he is starting to look. Actually, you know what? Left back he's looking pretty capable there. So there are not many household names to this Rennes team. There really aren't. But it's a case of I think from Arsenal fans is you could be not pleasantly surprised. I'm hoping they won't be pleasantly surprised, but surprised that. The quality, I suppose, throughout the squad. I think it's easy to just dismiss them as these 2 big name players and forget the rest. Well, actually, there is talent in that squad. Yeah, fair point. And it would be fair to say that this isn't the vintage of Arsenal's playing squad in truth as well, particularly without Alex Lacazette won't be able to get his return to France, being suspended as well. So you have a feeling Rennes will know what's coming in the shape of Aubameyang as far as their defence goes. In terms of the actual game itself, the first game, Jez, what can Arsenal expect from Roazhon Park? It's a 21,000 seat stadium, I believe. 20, right there or thereabouts, 30,000. What sort of atmosphere can they expect? Because there is obviously this tag of Ligue 1 being sort of, quote unquote farmers league and sort of, lesser to other atmospheres and other stadia in the European areas. I don't agree with that, and I think the atmosphere's been pretty good overall in terms of the stadiums this year. Do you think it'll be quite a kind of a intimidating atmosphere, if that's the right word, for Arsenal on Thursday?
Yeah, I don't know about intimidating, but I think there's certainly going to be a really good atmosphere and huge support behind Rennes. 90,000 applications for tickets. So it's really caught the local imagination. I mean, partly because this is, I think, the furthest that Rennes have ever gone in Europe, and also I do think that it's partly because of the fact that they're playing Arsenal, who are the big draw, who've obviously always had that sort of French, or certainly for the last 20 years or so, had that French connection. So there's definitely going to be a good crowd. The atmosphere thing, I think, is a bit of a myth. I mean, for a start, I'd say it's no worse than a lot of English grounds where, I'm not going to mention the Highbury Library, but more Anfield and Old Trafford, where I think it's the usual thing of the media playing up the atmosphere more than anything else. One, you'll never walk alone in the first minute, one in the 90th minute, and nothing in between, and apparently you're the best fans in the world. I'm not sure about that. In France, the home fans are generally very good, very loyal. When things are going well, you only need to look at Marseille to see that they're sort of very kind of, they've got lots of activists who are really behind you when things are going well and really get on your back when things are going badly. But generally, the atmosphere is great. There's a lot more sort of, I guess, say it, that there'll be people in the crowd whose job it is to sort of get the atmosphere going. There'll be a lot more sort of tifosis and flares than there ever are in England as well. So there should be no problem on that count. It's usually the fact that there isn't much of a tradition of travelling away support that's the issue in France, not helped by the fact that the LFP are constantly banning away fans because they're scared there's going to be trouble when there rarely is. In this case, with a huge home support and hopefully a decent travelling support from the Arsenal fans as well, I think there should be a great atmosphere.
Yeah, especially with it sort of being so close, with it being in France, you expect a good turnout from the Arsenal away fans, which are criminally underrated. I know I'd be slightly biased, but the away fans at Arsenal are a very good bunch.
And I think, for what it's worth, there is a sort of traditional connection between the clubs. Not that that should necessarily affect the atmosphere, but I don't know. I do think it possibly is another thing that's kind of led to the interest in this match. You've obviously got Peter Cech at the moment, who came from Arsenal. And in the past, you've got Sylvain Wiltord with Kim Källström. I know he's one of Rich's favourites. Obviously, didn't have the greatest time of his career. He wasn't at his peak when he was at Arsenal, anyway, but there have been connections between the two clubs that raised the interest a little as well.
Yeah, just on the atmosphere, very, very quickly. I think anyone watching the game, or if anyone's lucky enough to be in attendance at the game, is do keep an eye out pre-kickoff for the TIFO from the RCK or Rosen Celtic Cop, who are the chief supporters group for Rennes. They do produce some magnificent TIFOs pre-kickoff that totally cover their end of the stadium, and you'd only have to Google them and you'll see there have been various news articles, even over here, showing some of the amazing ones that they've produced, and they've done them in the Europa League as well. So they do generate a good atmosphere. It's certainly at the stronger end, I think, of atmosphere, despite it not being the biggest of grounds. But yeah, they are capable of. You're right. I don't think intimidating is the atmosphere, but certainly a little on the raucous side. That's not too fancy a way of putting it.
Read my mind. I was going to say raucous. Yeah. In terms of, from your perspective, Rich, on sort of the Rennes side, what kind of players from Arsenal do you? I mean, it's probably an obvious question because obviously the forwards is going to be a concern. But what sort of performance do you think Rennes are likely to put on in terms of their formation or how they set up for this home leg? Do you sort of see them trying to restrict the space for players to run into, or do you see it being more of a shut-up shop style, or do you think they'll actually go Arsenal in that first leg, particularly now we know the home leg is in France on Thursday?
I fully expect Rennes to come out in quite an attacking mood. Certainly that first leg at home against Real Betis was the case, and they were 2-0 up within pretty much the blink of an eye. So I expect them to come out strong. I don't expect anything particularly specific in terms of formation to face Arsenal. I'd expect them to still stick to the 4-2-3-1 formation that Stefan seems to be happy with. It's a formation that going forward obviously gives him a number of options, but honestly, when they're on the defensive, it allows it to become almost a 4-5-1. So it's quite a fluid formation. he'll have his two centre midfielders to try and control it, to try and limit the space. Benjamin Andre has got a really good engine on him. He will run for the full 90 minutes, chasing everything down. So he alone will be responsible for trying to limit space. And Aubameyang, who was the hero from the Betis tie, he's missing. He's out suspended. So if they bring in likely either Del Castillo, who they signed in the summer from Lyon, or Benjamin Bourigeaud, who was probably one of the star players last season, hasn't quite got his to his best this season. They will probably be brought in, and they could possibly be played on the left wing. But the nature of their play may be that they would drift in and again help to try and limit that space that's available. But in terms of Arsenal players, I mean, Aubameyang naturally is the one. Funnily enough, the last time he played against Rennes was in the 2013 Coupe de la Ligue final, where he set up the winner for I think it was Brandao. In that final.
Cool. Heady days.
Yeah. So that was back in 2013. I think I was actually looking up at his numbers against Rennes, and I think he scored 3 goals in 5 games against Rennes during his time with Saint-Etienne. So, Rennes as a club are familiar with him, although the only player to really survive since then is Romain Donze, who's out injured for the season. So, but yeah, they'll be the one he'll be the player that they'll focus on. Then it's a question of who's going to be in support to him, with no Lacazette. Will Mesut Ozil play? Will it be Ramsey? It's going to be, it'll be who is in support to Aubameyang that will be key as well. But I think in terms of Rennes' tactics, they will probably look at getting that ball to the likes of Ben Arfa, to the likes of Sarr, and getting them to run at the Arsenal defenders. It wouldn't surprise me a huge amount if they perhaps switch Ismaila Sarr to the left wing, knowing that Arsenal perhaps without perhaps a true recognised right back, maybe that's a weakness that Ismaila Sarr could potentially look to exploit. So it wouldn't surprise me to see him perhaps switch to the left and someone like Bourigeaud move over to the right. But yeah, I think in terms of tactics for Rennes, it'll be potentially counter-attacking, utilising that pace of Sarr, utilising the vision of Ben Arfa and the vision of someone like Grenier. And I certainly think the Arsenal defence is probably the area that can be got at the most. So I'd fully expect that will be the key tactic that Stefan will look to deploy against them.
Yeah, particularly if a certain Squadron is at the heart of the defence, we shall see on that one. Jez, in terms of the coverage and sort of talk in the French press and the French media about Rennes and Arsenal in this specific tie, what's the general chatter in France that you've picked up, and what do they expect? What's the kind of I guess expectations is the right word, really. What are the media and pundits suggesting in this game? Is it kind of very much worrying, or is it sort of actually this could be yet another in a season of highs for French football, yet another one potentially?
I think they're a little torn, as I sort of alluded to earlier in terms of the crowds, that it's kind of a source of frustration, a bit of a recurring theme on the French Football Weekly podcast, that a lot of the French coverage is generally very down on French football and sees everything about the Premier League through rose-tinted spectacles. And you only have to look at Lyon's performances against Man City and PSG's the other day against Man United to see that it's not clear cut as the Premier League seems to be head and shoulders above Ligue 1, despite that some very different levels of kind of financial resources that they can draw on, I guess. So I think, all that said, that they really still see Arsenal as a very big club, and there's no doubt that they are a bigger club than Rennes. But as you said earlier, this isn't the greatest Arsenal side ever. It still feels like it's a bit of a transition period with, I think, Emery doing an excellent job, but don't think anyone would have been expecting him to put up too many trees in his first season after the brilliant Wenger era. And Rennes on the other side they really are, I think, I don't know if Rich would agree, but to me they and especially Julien Stéphan are the real media darlings of French press at the moment. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure it's entirely deserved yet. Betis' result was very good, but in the first leg especially massively helped by some dodgy refereeing and some diving. But does feel that they're very close to sort of really breaking through. Julien Stéphan has done a fantastic job and is an exciting young coach. So I can see why, I do understand why they're getting positive attention. So I think that the press are a little bit tall. They definitely still see Arsenal as favourites though, but the Betis experience, and especially going there, which is a really intimidating atmosphere, and getting a result there shows that, you know, that Rennes possibly had more about them than certain other clubs in the past.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. Like you, I think it'd be mad to suggest Arsenal aren't favourites, but that doesn't always go the way that you think. As you mentioned there, Leon, Man City's a prime example. Just before we take a couple of questions from our listeners that we've got here, just wanted to ask you, Jez, as well. In fact, I'll ask you both on this subject because it'll be interesting to our listeners. What's the general thoughts on Unai Emery in France, if any at all? I mean, I imagine his name will have come up a little bit based around this tie, given his connection with PSG last couple of years. Is the job he's doing at Arsenal being recognised in France as well, or is it kind of old news now?
You only have to look at L'Equipe's coverage of Buffon against Areola. Areola's fantastic. I'm going slightly off subject, but he's a fantastic goalkeeper in his own right, and L'Equipe was so starstruck by Buffon that they completely ignore mistakes that he makes and jump on any minor mistakes that Areola might make. And it feels like the coverage of PSG in general is like that. They're just, you know, in awe of all these great players. And the problem for Emery at PSG was that he wasn't allowed to have enough authority over those big players. And a lot of the time the players were wrong, the players were underperforming. And Emery was constantly being undermined by a very strong, particularly Brazilian players, Clique and Nasser Al-Khelaifi above him. I think probably in everyone's hearts, you know, look at his record in Europa League, everyone knows that Emery was a good coach. I just think PSG was not a good fit for him. You can't judge him really on this year alone because he hasn't got necessarily the greatest defence to work with, because it is that kind of transition period. But I think I would have said he's doing at least as well as anyone could have expected him to do at this stage. I think he's getting the best out of certain players. There's question marks about certain things he does. I don't understand why he seems to have something against Lacazette playing 90 minutes. Overall, I think he's doing a great job. It was interesting to see Tremolinas, the French player who played for him under Sevilla, talk about him the other day and say, you can't argue with his record in terms of trophy wins, but he works the players so hard that at some point, a lot of them kind of have had enough of him and he loses them in the changing room. So it remains to be seen whether that happens at Arsenal, but so far so good, I think, and it isn't really a surprise. We know he's a good coach, he wasn't given the chances that he should have been given at PSG.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And similar question to you, Rich. I mean, does that sort of, again, as a man who obviously will be supporting Rennes in this tie, does that give Emery a small advantage, knowing that he is coming into face a team that he, in theory, should know quite a lot about due to his notorious fine tooth combing of opposition? He would have played Rennes a few times. Is that record sort of a bit skewed by the fact it was as PSG manager, or do you think he might have a few interesting things to pull out tactically in this game?
I think Rennes have changed a lot in terms of the style that they play, in terms of the personnel since Emery departed PSG. So, yeah, it'll count for a minuscule amount, but I think, I don't necessarily see it as being a major difference maker in this tie. I think, I'd agree with what Jez was saying. There was certainly I felt he was, during his time at PSG, and certainly once he was then, once he left the club, very much made a scapegoat for failings in Europe. And I think a lot of the players got off scot-free, I think, to an extent. He was made the scapegoat. He was the reason why they haven't progressed. And not at all to do with players not performing, not at all to do with players preferring to endorse, poker sites and things like that. So it was unfortunate for Emery. He is a good manager. PSG was just not the fit for him. From an outsider looking into Arsenal, I think the initial steps he's taken, I think, have been pretty good. I think time is needed. Obviously, it was not obvious thing to say. It was not going to be an easy thing to come in and replace Wenger and get instant success and instant results. It is a process, but I think the first 6 months, just over 6 months, I think can be viewed as a sort of relative pass.
Yeah, completely agree. Like you say, every manager needs time and backing from an owner. Interesting to see how that transpires over the summer, but that one's probably for a rainy day with our podcast. We've got a couple of questions I just want to finish on. We had a couple that were asked on Twitter, which I think you both kindly answered already, which was from Nicky Wilson and Pete Kennelly. So they've kind of been covered. So thank you guys for those. But we did have a couple of others. If you can just give us, I think we got 4 here. 3 from the same person. So if you can just give us a quick answer to these for me. Jez, I'll give you this one. It's kind of a humorous one, actually. If there was a fight between Emery and Ben Arthur, who do you think would win? I think that's in reference to maybe the Ozil situation he's currently in.
For me, Emery every day of the week.
I think you're right. Doesn't take any prisoners, really, does he, in that respect? And on the same lines, actually, Evan O also asked, out of 10, how motivated is Emery wanting to put one over on Ben Arthur? I feel about 15 personally. Is there still any sort of lingering issue, do you think, in that regard, Jez?
I don't think Emery's interested in putting one over on Ben Arthur. Ben Arthur might be motivated by that. But even then, I'm not sure to what extent everything that happened to him at PSG, I'm not sure to what extent it was down to Emery.
Down to Emery, yeah, exactly.
It was quite a few factors. So.
Hierarchy and attitude linking the two probably there in terms of it wasn't just the manager not picking him. There's so much more to it than that, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Let me give this one to you, Rich, from the same person, Evan O. Do you think certain players, puts Aubameyang cough, would want to prove their worth after the events at the weekend? The weekend aside, because that's probably more Arsenal focused, but do you think there will be a sort of a tinge of that from Alba? Obviously, like you said earlier, his previous days in St Etienne. I think I'm right in saying it's the first time he's gone back to France since leaving St Etienne. I could be wrong, but I don't remember Dortmund playing in France between those times. So do you think he'll have
played Monaco?
Oh, of course they did. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I don't know. I presume he was part of that squad. But yeah, is it an opportunity, do you think, Rich, for him to sort of remind everybody of just how good he was, maybe without sparkly boots this time?
I don't know if he needs to be reminding, necessarily using that as the motivation. I think the motivation might be to actually rediscover the form. Again, I only speak as an outsider looking in, but it seems as though the last few weeks his form has dropped off a bit. I only know that because he's in my fantasy football team, and that's he's really cost me there. So I'll take up my complaints with him there. But I don't think, having played in France, it necessarily needs him to be coming back and proving, what a good player was. He clearly had a very successful time when he was with Saint Etienne. He scored a hatful of goals. He brought them domestic cup success. So I don't necessarily think it's a case of reminding people, no, but I think this will be more a case of, this is a European competition. He hasn't necessarily got Lacazette with him, who maybe sometimes drags a little bit of attention. I speak that as a Lacazette fan. So no, in answer to the question, I don't think he will be needing to prove anything to anybody. If anybody, I suppose it'll be to Emery to remind him that actually, I am a very, very good player on my day.
What about from your side of things to round us off then, Rich? If you sort of speaking as a fan in this circumstance, obviously Rennes will play their strongest 11 in the first game. Do you feel like it's kind of all on Thursday, and then if they don't get the result that really they need, is it kind of not all over, but say, for example, Arsenal were to come away with a win in France, would you then think that Rennes would go, well, we tried and sort of play out the second leg with the best intentions, or do you think they would essentially do what they did with Betis and go into it heads up and just go again?
No, they'd definitely still go for it. It's been refreshing to see how seriously Rennes have taken this competition. There have been many French teams over the last few years who don't take the Europa League seriously, play a reserve team because they want to concentrate on qualifying for the Europa League next season. And then it's that vicious circle. Rennes have taken this very seriously. They played their strongest 11 wherever possible. Even if they were to come away from Thursday facing a significant deficit, say Arsenal win 3-0, they would still go to go to North London, they would still put out a strong team. They would still give it a go. You never know what happened. I never predicted a 3-1 win in Seville against Betis.
No.
I don't think many Rennes fans would have done the same either. So on their day, the performance is there. They've put in some really good performances in the league over the last few seasons against some big teams. You know, not many have gone to the Parc des Princes and beaten PSG. Rennes have done it 3 times in the last, I think, 5 or 6 seasons, which is up there with the very best records against PSG. So they can mix it with the big teams. Obviously, if it's a 6-0, something like that on Thursday night, then I reserve the right to amend my answer. But it's not going to be. Touch wood there. It's not going to be. No, they in short, they won't. They won't play a weakened team. They won't just coast through it with we did our best. They would go for it no matter what.
Right then, we'll bring the pod to a close there. But of course, it would be silly of me to not ask for a prediction from both the guests because, you have to, don't you? Jez, what do you foresee happening in the first leg, and overall, who do you back to go through?
Overall, I'd back Arsenal to go through, but to make it interesting and to sort of hold the French flag up high, I'll go for a 2-1 win for Rennes in this leg.
Interesting. And Rich, what do you reckon?
Over the 2 legs, Arsenal clearly, I think, should have the quality to get them through. I will be more realistic than Jez. I will go with a 2-2 draw. I think it will follow a similar pattern, although not as high scoring as the home leg against Betis, where I think Rennes will come out strong, but will probably just run out of gas in the second half.
I think like you both as well. I do fancy there'll be goals in this. I never back Arsenal for a clean sheet anymore. I went off that idea about 4 years ago, and I think it's the sort of game that, based upon what happened in Borisov, I think Arsenal need an away performance. I don't think they can afford to. Rennes are obviously clearly a lot better than Bate. I don't think they can afford to go into that second tie trailing, or at the very least without an away goal. I think it will be an entertaining game. So we shall see. If you have enjoyed listening to this, thank you. If you have an interest in French football, you know where to find me, so you don't need me to tell you that. But if you want to have a chat with Rich or Jez, and you want to ask a bit more information ahead of Thursday, you can do so, of course, via Twitter. Rich, where can people find you?
At Rich_Allen85.
And Jez, where can people find you?
At Jeremy Smith 98.
Good stuff. So, if any of you want to ask questions, I'm sure the lads will do their best to reply to any questions you may have. And, of course, if you have a particular interest in French football and you want to hear us 3 prattle on along with our co-host Phil, we record a podcast called French Football Weekly, which you can find. We do a podcast pretty much every week. We don't have a structure in terms of what day, because it never seems to work out. Whenever we say, yes, we'll do this day, it never works out that way. But if you follow at French FT Weekly on Twitter, you will see when a podcast drops. So give us a follow and a listen if you'd like to hear more. But it just remains for me to thank my guests for this evening for this special. So thank you very much to both yourself, Jez and Rich. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank
you very much.
Very much.
And the podcast will be up as usual. We're recording this week as per normal, where I'm sure there'll be a slightly more heavily Arsenal-themed preview of the Rennes tie, as well as a look ahead at the Manchester United game at the weekend. So tune in for that. Thank you very much for listening, and we will speak to you very soon. Night.